May 23, 1945, a British interrogation facility in Lüneburg, Germany. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS and architect of the Holocaust, bites down on a cyanide capsule hidden in his mouth. Within 12 minutes, he is dead, at age 44, escaping justice for orchestrating the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others in the Nazi death camp system. But here's what most people don't know. When Hitler died, he left behind a wife, a daughter, and a secret, a mistress, and 2 illegitimate children that his wife didn't even know existed. What happened to Heinrich Hitler's family after his death is a story more complex and morally troubling than almost any other Nazi family legacy. Because unlike Göring's daughter Edda, who spent her life in denial, or Hitler's relatives who tried to disappear, Hitler's daughter Gudrun made a choice that shocks historians to this day. She became the Nazi princess, dedicating her entire life to helping SS war criminals escape justice, denying the Holocaust, and building an underground network that protected mass murderers until her death in 2018. This is the story of how the children of the Holocaust's chief architect responded to their father's monstrous legacy, how a little girl who called him Pappy grew up to become one of the most dedicated Nazi apologists of the post-war era, and how Hitler's secret second family chose a radically different path. To understand what happened after, we need to understand who Heinrich Himmler was and the family he built while orchestrating genocide. Heinrich Luitpold Himmler was born on October 7, 1900, in Munich, the son of a strict Catholic schoolteacher. He joined the Nazi Party in 1923, participated in Hitler's failed beer hall push, and by 1929, Hitler appointed him Reichsführer SS, leader of the Schutzstaffel, which at that time was just a small personal bodyguard unit of about 280 men. Under Hitler's leadership, the SS grew into a massive paramilitary organization of over 800,000 members by 1945, controlling the concentration camp system, the Gestapo's secret police, and the Einsatzgruppen death squads that murdered over 1 million Jews in mobile killing operations across Eastern Europe. Himmler personally attended executions, visited concentration camps to inspect the killing operations, and was directly involved in planning and implementing the final solution. On January 20, 1942, his subordinate, Reinhard Heydrich, chaired the Wannsee Conference, where the administrative details of murdering all European Jews were finalized, and Himmler oversaw the entire genocidal operation. He was responsible for Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Majdanek, and the entire network of death camps. His signature appears on documents ordering mass executions, approving medical experiments on prisoners, and authorizing the expansion of killing facilities. If there was a single person most responsible for the Holocaust's implementation, it was Heinrich Himmler. But this architect of death also had a carefully compartmentalized family life that he kept separate from his crimes. On July 3, 1928, Himmler married Marguerite Boden, a nurse, 7 years his senior, who owned a small clinic in Berlin. Marguerite, called Marga by family and friends, came from a middle-class German family and shared Heinrich's conservative nationalist politics. She was a devoted Nazi wife who believed in her husband's mission to purify Germany, though how much she knew about the specifics of his crimes would remain debated by historians for decades. The couple purchased a small farm in Gund am Tegernsee, about 50 kilometers south of Munich, where Marga raised chickens and maintained a modest household, while Heinrich was increasingly absorbed in building the SS empire. On August 8, 1929, Marga gave birth to their only child together. The baby was called Gudrun, and she would become the center of Heinrich Himmler's emotional world, perhaps the only person he genuinely loved besides himself. Himmler was, by all accounts, a devoted father to Gudrun. He called her Puppy or Puppy, a German term of endearment meaning little doll, wrote her affectionate letters when traveling, brought her gifts from his trips across Nazi-occupied Europe, and spent time with her whenever possible. Despite his crushing workload, overseeing genocide. This created one of history's most disturbing paradoxes. A man who could order the murder of thousands of children daily would return home to play tenderly with his own daughter. But Heinrich was living a double life. In 1936, when Gudrun was 7, Hitler began an affair with his secretary, Hedwig Potthast, who was 15 years younger. The relationship was kept secret from Marga. On February 15, 1942, just weeks after the Wannsee Conference, Hedwig gave birth to Hitler's illegitimate son, Helge. 2 years later, on July 3, 1944, Hedwig gave birth to a daughter, Nanette Dorothea. Hitler supported this second family financially, visiting them regularly at a house in Berchtesgaden, but kept their Hitler created differently the fashion down, and part of Hitler's co-founded by Ali Jenny. Hitler was the first profit manager in the form of Mayor 10SD. When Heinrich Hitler died on May 23, 1945, he left behind two families, his official wife and 15-year-old daughter, who knew him as a devoted father, and his secret mistress and two young children who would grow up in the shadow of their father's unspeakable crimes. Gudrun's arrest and the beginning of a lifelong mission. When Heinrich Himmler died on May 23, 1945, his daughter Gudrun was 15 years old and living with her mother Marga in South Tyrol, Italy, where they had fled as Allied forces closed in. Gudrun's world collapsed, not because she understood the full horror of what her father had done, but because the man she adored was suddenly gone. But the Allies weren't done with the Himmler family. On June 13, 1945, just 21 days after Heinrich's suicide, British forces arrested both Marga and Gudrun. They were taken to an internment camp in Bolzano, Italy, and held for questioning. The interrogations, documented in declassified British intelligence files, reveal a 15-year-old girl who was defiant, loyal, and completely convinced of her father's innocence. When British interrogators showed Gudrun photographs from Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz, images of mass graves, emaciated survivors, gas chambers, her response was chilling. "These are lies, enemy propaganda. My father would never have allowed such things." When pressed about visiting concentration camps with her father, which records confirm, including Dachau in 1941 when she was 12, Gudrun claimed she had only seen orderly work camps, not extermination facilities. The British held her and her mother in various internment facilities for nearly 4 years. During this period, from 1945 to 1949, something crucial happened. Instead of Gudrun's loyalty weakening as more evidence emerged, it actually strengthened. Psychologists who later studied her case identified this as traumatic bonding and cognitive dissonance. Faced with reconciling the loving father she knew with the mass murderer the world condemned, Gudrun's mind chose to reject all external evidence and construct an alternate reality where her father was innocent. In letters preserved in British archives, 16-year-old Gudrun wrote, "They tell us terrible lies about Papa, but I know my Papa. He was good and kind. These are all lies told by our enemies." This was the beginning of a lifelong mission. On November 15, 1949, after nearly 4.5 years of detention, British authorities released Marga and Gudrun. They had found no evidence that either woman had directly participated in Nazi crimes. Mother and daughter returned to Munich, but instead of trying to disappear into anonymity like many Nazi families, Gudrun made a shocking choice. At age 20 in 1950, Gudrun began actively corresponding with imprisoned Nazi war criminals and their families, offering emotional support, financial assistance, and validation of their view that they had been unfairly convicted. She became a regular visitor to Landsberg prison, where many convicted Nazi war criminals were held, bringing letters, packages, and words of encouragement to men who had participated in mass murder. By 1951, Gudrun had connected with other family members of executed or imprisoned Nazi leaders, forming an informal network of Nazi descendants who refused to accept their relatives' guilt. In 1952, at age 23, Gudrun attended her first meeting of Stille Hilfe, Silent Help, an organization founded in 1951 to provide legal aid, financial support, and logistical assistance to imprisoned Nazi war criminals and SS members. The organization's real mission was helping war criminals escape prosecution, providing false documents, funding legal appeals, and preserving Nazi ideology. Gudrun became one of its most active and eventually most powerful members, rising to a leadership position she would hold until weeks before her death, 66 years later. This wasn't passive loyalty. This was active participation in protecting men who had committed crimes against humanity. The Nazi Princess and her secret network. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, as West Germany rebuilt itself, Gudrun lived a double life. She appeared ordinary, working as a secretary, living quietly with her mother until Marga's death on August 25, 1967. But behind this facade, Gudrun was building one of the most effective underground networks for protecting Nazi war criminals in post-war Europe. On June 25, 1965, at age 35, Gudrun married Wolf-Dieter Berwitz, a writer who shared her political views. She became Gudrun Berwitz. The marriage produced 2 children who grew up in a household where their grandfather Heinrich Himmler was spoken of as a hero. Stille Hilfe, under Gudrun's leadership throughout the 1970s and 1980s, provided multiple forms of assistance to Nazi war criminals. The organization raised money from wealthy Nazi sympathizers, including some former SS officers who had successfully hidden their pasts and built new fortunes in post-war Germany, and used these funds to pay for expensive legal defenses for accused war criminals. When Dutch authorities arrested Klaus Karel Faber in 1952 for his role in the murder of 22 Dutch resistance fighters and Jews, Stille Hilfe funded his legal appeals for decades. When former SS officer Erich Priebke was discovered living in Argentina in 1994 and extradited to Italy to face trial for the Ardiatini massacre, where 335 Italian civilians were murdered on March 24, 1944, Stille Hilfe provided financial support for his defense. When concentration camp guards, Einsatzgruppen members, and other Nazi criminals were identified decades after the war, Gudrun's network worked to obstruct justice by providing false alibis, funding legal challenges, and in some cases, helping suspects flee before they could be arrested. Declassified documents from German intelligence services released in 2011 revealed that Stille Hilfe and Gudrun personally were under surveillance by German domestic intelligence from the 1960s through the early 2000s. But authorities were reluctant to take action against the organization because it carefully operated within legal boundaries. Providing legal aid and financial support to accused criminals was not itself illegal, even if the organization's sympathies were clearly with perpetrators rather than victims. But here's what shocked investigators when the full scope of Gudrun's activities became public. She wasn't just providing passive financial support. She was actively involved in helping war criminals evade justice through an underground railroad similar to the famous rat lines that had helped Nazis escape to South America in the 1940s and 1950s. In 1998, British journalist and Nazi hunter Guy Walters published evidence that Gudrun had personally met with Anton Maloff in the 1980s and early 1990s. Maloff was a former SS guard at the Theresienstadt concentration camp who was wanted for murdering prisoners, and he had fled to Italy where he lived under an assumed name. According to Walter's investigation, Gudrun provided Maloff with money and support while he evaded authorities, and she only stopped after he was finally arrested in Italy in 1995. When confronted by German media, Gudrun's response was chilling. "These men served Germany. They deserve our support and loyalty. The accusations against them are exaggerated or false. I do what my conscience tells me is right." This statement in 1998, 53 years after the war ended, demonstrates that Gudrun had learned nothing, acknowledged nothing. Throughout the 2010s, Gudrun remained active in Stille Hilfe. In 2011, at age 81, she was photographed attending a memorial gathering for Nazi war criminals, standing among neo-Nazis and elderly SS veterans who gave Hitler salutes. When questioned by journalists, Gudrun stated, "My father was a great man who served his country. History has judged him unfairly. I will defend his memory until my last breath." She kept that promise. On May 24, 2018, Gudrun Berwitz, born Gudrun Himmler, died at age 88 in Munich. She had spent 73 years, her entire adult life, from age 15 until her death, defending her father's legacy, supporting Nazi war criminals, and denying the Holocaust. Her death received significant international media coverage. Newspapers called her the Nazi princess and Himmler's faithful daughter, but within neo-Nazi circles, she was mourned as a hero, the secret family who chose silence. While Gudrun dedicated her life to defending her father, another branch of Heinrich Hitler's family was making radically different choices. Remember that Heinrich Hitler had a secret second family that Marga and Gudrun didn't know existed, his mistress Hedwig Potthast, and their two children, Helge, born February 15, 1942, and Nanette Dorothea, born July 3, 1944. When Hitler died on May 23, 1945, these children were just 3 years old and 10 months old, far too young to have memories of their father. Hedwig Potthast, 32 when Hitler died, faced an impossible situation. She was the mistress of one of history's most notorious mass murderers, with two small children who would forever be associated with his crimes if their identities became known. Hedwig made a decision. She would disappear completely, change her identity, and ensure her children grew up never knowing who their father really was. In the chaotic months after the war, Hedwig vanished. She changed her name. Records suggest she took the surname Busch or Bockmann. She moved to a small Bavarian town and lived under her assumed identity, working menial jobs to support her children. Unlike Marga and Gudrun, who were arrested, Hedwig was never detained, likely because she had kept such a low profile. For decades, almost nothing was known about what happened to Hedwig and her children. They became historical ghosts, names in captured SS documents, but no trail of their post-war lives. It wasn't until investigative journalists in the 1990s and early 2000s began systematically tracking down descendants of Nazi leaders that fragments of information about Hitler's secret family began to emerge. What researchers discovered was that Hedwig had been remarkably successful in her mission to hide. She lived quietly until her death, reportedly in the 1990s, never giving interviews, never contacting neo-Nazi organizations, never attempting to defend Himmler's legacy or participate in the underground network that Gudrun had built. But here's what makes this story even more complex. Hedwig apparently told her children very little about their father. According to fragmentary information that has emerged from sources close to the family, Helge and Nanette grew up believing their father had died in the war as an ordinary soldier. Some accounts suggest Hedwig told them their father had been named Hans or Karl, a common soldier who fell in combat. Neither Helge nor Nanette grew up with the same attachment to Heinrich Himmler's memory that defined Gudrun's entire existence. Helge Himmler, Heinrich's only son, grew up in obscurity, reportedly trained as an engineer, married, had children, and lived a completely private life. There are no photographs of him as an adult, no interviews, no public statements. He has never been associated with neo-Nazi organizations, never attended SS veteran gatherings, never publicly acknowledged his connection to Heinrich Himmler. The same is true for Nanette Dorothea. She too has lived in complete anonymity. Unlike Gudrun's children, whose identities are known to researchers, Helge and Nanette's descendants have remained so successfully hidden that their names, locations, and even their existence as adults are largely unconfirmed. This level of secrecy, maintained across nearly 80 years, is extraordinary and suggests deliberate, sustained effort to avoid any connection to the Himmler name. Some historians speculate that Helge and Nanette eventually learned the truth about their father, but unlike Gudrun, they made the choice to reject that legacy entirely. Holocaust researchers who have studied Nazi family trees have stated that they know or strongly suspect the identities of Himmler's descendants from his relationship with Hedwig Potthast. but they have deliberately chosen not to publish this information out of respect for these individuals' right to privacy. The general consensus among ethical historians is that descendants who have committed no crimes themselves, who have not defended their relatives' actions, and who have not participated in neo-Nazi activities deserve the same privacy rights as anyone else. Helge and Nanette Himmler fall into this category. They have harmed no one, defended nothing, and simply tried to live quiet lives away from the history they had no part in creating. Their choice represents the opposite approach from Gudrun's defiant loyalty, and arguably, it's the more ethical response, acknowledging that some legacies are so tainted that the best course of action is complete separation rather than attempted rehabilitation. The legacy of denial and the questions that remain. The contrast between Gudrun's lifelong mission to defend her father and the complete silence maintained by Himmler's children from his secret family reveals something profound about choice and moral responsibility in the shadow of genocide. In 2014, German historian Michael Wilt published research based on newly discovered correspondence between Heinrich Himmler and his wife Marga. These letters reveal that Marga knew far more about her husband's crimes than she ever admitted. In a letter from November 1941, Marga wrote, "I understand the difficult work you must do in the East. It must be hard on you, but it is necessary for our people's future." This was written just months after the Einsatzgruppen had begun systematic mass shootings of Jews. In another letter from March 1943, Marga referenced the camps and expressed pride that Heinrich was solving the Jewish problem. These letters demonstrate that Marga was not an innocent wife, but rather a willing supporter of her husband's genocidal mission. This revelation has implications for understanding Gudrun's psychology. If Marga knew about the Holocaust and supported it, and if she raised Gudrun to believe her father was a hero even after the war, then Gudrun's lifelong denial wasn't just the result of a daughter's love. It was deliberate indoctrination combined with her own adult choices to reject truth. Gudrun had opportunities throughout her 88 years to break free. She had access to historical documents, survivor testimonies, scholarly research. Instead, she chose to double down on denial and spent her life actively harming Holocaust survivors by supporting war criminals. When Gudrun died on May 24, 2018, Jewish organizations issued statements expressing relief that she could no longer support war criminals, but also warning that the network she had built continued to operate. In August 2019, just over a year after Gudrun's death, German authorities finally moved to disband Stille Hilfe, declaring it a threat to democratic values. The organization had operated for 68 years, providing support to hundreds of Nazi war criminals. Gudrun's children, Heinrich Himmler's grandchildren, through his legitimate daughter, have remained almost entirely out of public view. Unlike Gudrun, who actively sought connections with the Nazi past, her children appear to have chosen privacy. This collates an interesting parallel with Helge and Nanette. All of Himmler's grandchildren, from both families, have avoided public association with their grandfather's legacy, saying that the third generation may be breaking the cycle of denial. As we reach 2024, nearly 79 years after Heinrich Himmler's death, there are likely dozens of Himmler's descendants alive today. Most will never be publicly identified, and most have probably lived their entire lives trying to escape a connection they never chose. The Hitler family story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Was Gudrun a victim of childhood indoctrination who never had a real chance to escape? Or was she a morally responsible adult who made evil choices? The answer is probably both. She was shaped by her upbringing, but she also had decades of adult life, during which she could have chosen differently. What about Helge and Nanette, and the children Gudrun raised? Do they bear any responsibility for crimes committed by a grandfather they never knew? Most ethical frameworks would say no, that individual guilt cannot be inherited, but they do have a responsibility to acknowledge historical truth, rather than perpetuating denial. Those who choose silence, who simply live private lives, without defending or denying their relatives' crimes, occupy a morally neutral space that most people would consider acceptable. They didn't choose their ancestry, and they aren't obligated to spend their lives apologizing for acts they had no part in. But those who actively defend perpetrators, who work to help war criminals escape justice, who deny genocide, like Gudrun Himmler did for 73 years, cross a moral line from innocent descendant to active participant in historical injustice. Gudrun's choice to dedicate her entire adult life to supporting Nazi war criminals transformed her from a victim of circumstance into a perpetrator of a different kind of crime, denying justice to Holocaust survivors, attempting to minimize genocide, helping murderers escape accountability. In the end, the Hitler family story is about choices. Gudrun chose defiance, loyalty, and denial. Helge and Nanette chose silence and anonymity. Neither choice erases the past or brings back the millions who died in the camps Heinrich Hitler built. But the choices we make about how we remember the past, how we confront uncomfortable truths, and whether we choose acknowledgement or denial, these choices matter because they shape not just our understanding of history, but our ability to prevent such horrors from happening again. The Hitler family's story proves that we are not prisoners of our bloodlines, but we are defined by our choices. Gudrun chose denial and spent 73 years defending the architect of genocide, while her half-siblings chose silence and anonymity, showing that even children of monsters can choose their own path. If this exploration of hidden history and the moral complexities of inherited guilt resonates with you, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We uncover the untold stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about how evil echoes through generations and why facing history honestly is the only path to preventing its repetition. In the end, legacy is not what we inherit, but what we choose to perpetuate or reject. And that choice belongs to each of us every single day.